The universe had a twisted sense of humor. This much was obvious to anyone who'd spent more than 5 minutes observing the absolute circus that was intergalactic politics. The Galactic Confederation of Aligned Species, or as the more cynical observers called it, that bloated bureaucratic nightmare, had existed for approximately 12,000 cycles, give or take a few centuries that nobody liked to talk about, because of that unfortunate business with the Elixian mind slugs. Throughout its illustrious and thoroughly self-congratulatory history, the Confederation had encountered precisely 42 species that had achieved faster-than-light travel independently. 42! The statistical improbability of this number matching an obscure reference from a long-extinct human author was not lost on Dr. Zilksop Tau, who had the misfortune of being the Confederation's leading xenoarchaeologist, and therefore responsible for explaining why civilizations kept vanishing. Respectfully, High Counselor, which was Zilksop's way of saying, "Listen, you pompous gas bag, I am not suggesting we abandon the investigation. I am merely pointing out that sending another research team to the quarantine sector would be about as wise as attempting to mate with a Vargosian acid spitter during its digestive cycle." The High Counselor, a gelatinous purple mass named Blurplex, whose 17 sensory appendages were currently twitching with annoyance, made a sound like a wet balloon deflating slowly. "Your concerns are noted, Doctor," Blurplex gurgled, voice modulator translating the bubbling sounds into something approximating speech. "However, the disappearance of the Trixilian Empire cannot be ignored. 6 billion sentients don't simply vanish overnight." A pause, followed by what passed for a chuckle in Blurplex's species. "Well, evidently they do, but you understand my meaning." Zilksop's exoskeleton creaked as he shifted uncomfortably in the anti-gravity chair. 6 previous civilizations have disappeared after making contact with what we believe to be human artifacts. The pattern is clear. "And yet," interjected Ambassador Krill of the Silicon Consciousness, his voice emerging from a floating metallic orb that served as his mobile platform, "we still have no concrete evidence linking these disappearances to humanity itself." "Ah, yes," Zilksop replied, mandibles clicking in what his species recognized as barely contained sarcasm. "Because concrete evidence tends to be somewhat difficult to gather when everyone who touches the artifact in question ceases to exist." The chamber fell silent. Even the perpetually chattering avian delegation stopped preening long enough to stare at the normally composed xenoarchaeologist. "Perhaps," ventured Diplomat Ingrex of the Photosynthetic Collective, her leafy appendages rustling thoughtfully, "Dr. Tau would benefit from explaining the timeline once more, for clarity." Zilksop projected a 3-dimensional star map into the center of the council chamber. Red dots pulsed ominously across various sectors. Approximately 1,200 cycles ago, the first disappearance occurred, the Zeth hegemony. Their last transmission mentioned discovering a peculiar metallic rectangle with primitive symbolic engravings on an abandoned mining outpost. 3 cycles later, their entire civilization, 11 planets, 417 space stations, and approximately 18 billion sentients, vanished without explanation. Similar incidents occurred with the Quantum Hive, the Crystalline Technocracy, the Methane Swimmers Cooperative, the Gaseous Philosophers, and most recently, the Trixilian Empire. Ambassador Krill's orb pulsed with blue light. "And the connection to humanity is?" "Each artifact discovered bore markings consistent with late demolition human language," Zilksop explained, projecting images of strange symbols. "Sony, made in Japan, and Warrandy Wood, but humans have been extinct for over 1,500 cycles," protested a representative from the Silicate Coalition, their rocky form grinding with skepticism. "Their planet was rendered uninhabitable during their brief but catastrophically stupid nuclear exchange." "Correct," Zilksop agreed. "Which makes this all the more perplexing. How did artifacts from a self-destructive species that barely achieved rudimentary space travel end up scattered across 7 sectors of the galaxy? And more importantly, why does contact with these artifacts result in the complete disappearance of advanced civilizations?" High Counselor Blurplax's central mass rippled thoughtfully. "The Confederation has voted. We will assemble a multi-species research team to investigate the latest disappearance." "With appropriate containment protocols," interrupted Zilksop. "With appropriate containment protocols," Blurplex conceded, "to determine once and for all what connection these human artifacts have to the disappearances." Which was how, 3 cycles later, Dr. Zilksoptow found himself aboard the research vessel Improbable Causality, approaching the former homeworld of the Trixilian Empire with a crew composed of the galaxy's most brilliant minds and, unfortunately, several politicians who'd insisted on coming along to oversee the operation. "Preparing for orbital insertion," announced Navigator Plex 8, her cybernetic implants glowing softly as she interfaced with the ship's systems. "Sensors detect no signs of artificial radiation, defense systems, or communication signals. It appears the Traxilians are indeed gone." "Impossible," muttered Councillor Vrex Thormar, a methane breather whose containment suit hissed with each agitated movement. "A Type 2 civilization doesn't simply vanish without leaving radiation signatures, debris, or at least a strongly worded message." Dr. McKeevy Rex, the expedition's quantum physicist, looked up from her datapad with an expression that somehow conveyed both fascination and terror, despite her insectoid features lacking mammalian emotional markers. "The ambient background radiation is consistent with a civilization that never existed in the first place," she announced, her translator struggling to convey the scientific impossibility. "It's as if the Trixilians were retroactively erased from the timeline." "That's not possible," Councillor Vraxtoma insisted, though his methane mix notably increased its sedative component. "Many things shouldn't be possible," Zilksop observed dryly, "and yet here we are, investigating the seventh impossible thing before breakfast." The landing party assembled in the shuttle bay. Zilksop, Dr. Rex, Security Chief Krizik of the Predator Alliance, whose species had evolved from apex carnivores but now primarily expressed their hunting instincts through aggressive contract negotiation, and, unfortunately, Councillor Vrex Tomahar, who had invoked some obscure regulatory clause requiring political supervision of all extinction-level investigation. As the shuttle descended toward the Trixilian capital, or where it should have been, scanners revealed only virgin landscape. Rolling plains, nascent forests, and primitive life forms occupied the space where, according to Confederation records, a metropolis housing 300 million sentients had stood just months earlier. "The temporal displacement is accelerating," Rox announced, compound eyes fixed on her instruments. "We're registering chronological anomalies consistent with at least 5 different timelines attempting to reconcile simultaneously." "In simple terms, Doctor," Vraxtomar demanded, his containment suit emitting stress pheromones that the filtration system couldn't quite neutralize. "In simple terms," Rex's mandibles clicked with what might have been amusement, "reality is having an existential crisis." The shuttle touched down in a clearing where the Trixilian Central Archive should have stood. Instead, primitive vegetation swayed in a gentle breeze. Security Chief Krychek immediately established a perimeter, more from trained habit than any apparent threat. "Atmospheric composition is pre-industrial," reported the chief, holstering her molecular analyzer. "No trace elements consistent with technological development. If I didn't know better, I'd say we're looking at a planet that never evolved sentient life." Zilksop activated his scanning equipment, sweeping the area methodically. "Counselor, I must insist you remain within the designated safe zone. We have no idea what—" The scanner emitted a high-pitched tone interrupting his warning. "Anomalous reading, bearing 035, approximately 200 meters." Zilksop's exoskeleton tensed visibly. "Energy signature consistent with previous artifacts." Despite strict protocols, the entire team moved toward the signal, scientific curiosity overriding self-preservation instincts, a failing common to intelligent species across the galaxy. They found it half buried in loamy soil, a small rectangular object, approximately 20 centimeters long, 10 wide, and 3 thick. Metallic, with faded markings and what appeared to be primitive input mechanisms. "Containment field activated," Dr. Rex announced, generating a quantum isolation bubble around the artifact. "Beginning non-invasive scanning." "Is that—" Rex Tomar leaned closer despite himself, methane mix now heavy with curiosity compounds. "A human artifact?" Zilksop's primary eyes narrowed while his secondary visual clusters focused on the scanner readout. "Consistent with human manufacturing techniques from their late technological period, approximately 15200 cycles ago. The markings translate to Walkman and portable cassette player." "But what is it?" Krychek asked, predatory instincts clearly registering the object as potentially dangerous, despite its innocuous appearance. "Some form of primitive entertainment device," Zilksop hypothesized. "The Quantum Hive discovered a similar object before their disappearance. They called it an iPod. in their final transmission. Gloria's scanning beam flickered as it passed over the device. This is unusual. The object appears to exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously. It's both here and somewhere else. That's not particularly helpful, Doctor, Rex Tamar observed with the special condescension politicians reserve for scientists whose findings don't align with preferred policy outcomes. Speaking as someone with 3 doctorates in quantum mechanics, Rex replied, antennae twitching irritably, I'm aware of how unhelpful it is to discover that fundamental reality doesn't work the way we thought it did. Zilksop carefully adjusted the containment field. The previous artifacts exhibited similar properties. The crystalline technocracy reported that their discovered object, a Nokia 3300, appeared to violate conservation of energy, maintaining power despite being thousands of cycles old. So these human devices somehow erase civilizations from existence? Kryzhik's hunting barbs extended slightly from her forearms, an instinctive response to perceived threats. Not the devices themselves, Zilksop said slowly, mandibles clicking in the pattern that indicated a developing hypothesis. But, perhaps, what they connect to. The ground beneath them trembled slightly. We should return to the shuttle, Zilksop suggested, with the calm tone of someone suggesting they might want to consider not being where they currently were with some urgency. Too late. The containment field around the human artifact flickered and collapsed as reality itself seemed to hiccup. The rectangular device lay exposed on the ground, a small indicator light blinking red, then green, then a color that shouldn't exist. Don't touch it, Zilksop warned, but Councillor Rex Tamar, embodying the politician's belief that rules applied primarily to others, had already reached for it. The moment the councillor's containment-gloved appendage made contact with the device, a sound emerged. A sound that shouldn't have been possible in the atmosphere of this world. A sound that contained frequencies beyond the audible range of any known species, yet somehow registered in the consciousness of all present. It was music, human music, and accompanying it, a voice speaking in an ancient human language that none of them should have understood, yet all comprehended perfectly. Hello, this is Dr. Eleanor Price of the Temporal Archaeology Division. If you're hearing this message, you've activated an emergency beacon from Timeline Alpha. Please stand by for extraction. Reality folded. There was no other word for it. The landscape around them seemed to bend like fabric, colors inverting, solid matter becoming transparent and then reconstituting in impossible configurations. When the universe stopped having what appeared to be a seizure, they were no longer standing on the surface of a planet. Instead, they found themselves in a vast chamber filled with technology far beyond anything the Confederation had ever developed, and they were surrounded by beings that, impossible as it seemed, were unmistakably human. Welcome to Temporal Observation Post Alpha 7, said one of the humans, a female with dark skin and curly hair confined in a complex pattern. She wore a uniform of some sort, adorned with insignia that Zilksop's xenocultural database couldn't identify. I'm Commander Adiola Thompson. You're safe, but I imagine you have questions. Zilksop, speaking for the stunned group, managed only, humans are extinct. You self-destructed 1500 cycles ago. Commander Thompson's expression shifted to what Zilksop's cultural database identified as amused. That's the official story, yes. Much easier than explaining that we transcended linear time. Transcended time. Dr. Rax's scientific curiosity overrode her shock. That's theoretically impossible. So was faster-than-light travel until someone did it, another human replied, this one with pale skin and facial fur around the mouth region. I'm Dr. Kazimir Petrov, Theoretical Chronodynamics. The short version? We didn't go extinct. We went sideways. Sideways, repeated Zilchov flatly. Out of the timeline, Commander Thompson explained, gesturing to a holographic display that materialized beside her. It showed the familiar spiral of the galaxy, but with layers upon layers of semi-parallel duplicates offset slightly from each other. Humanity discovered that reality isn't singular. It's a multiverse of overlapping timelines. Rather than continuing our expansion outward into space, we expanded sideways, into parallel dimensions and alternate histories. But the nuclear devastation of Earth, began Councillor Rex Thurnar, happened in your timeline, Dr. Petrov interjected, one of many possible outcomes. In others, we developed temporal technology first. Once we could move between timelines, we evolved. Security Chief Kryjek's hunting barbs were now fully extended. And the disappearing civilizations, the Zeth, the Trixilians, did you destroy them? Commander Thompson shook her head. Not destroyed, relocated. The artifacts you've been finding aren't just devices, they're emergency beacons, placed in various timelines to monitor for catastrophic temporal events. What kind of events? Zil-Usopp asked. A new human entered the chamber, older than the others, with silver hair and an air of authority that transcended species barriers. Timeline collapse, Dr. Tao. I'm Director Xavier Chen of the Temporal Conservation Initiative. Your confederation exists in what we categorize as a highly unstable branch of reality, one that has collapsed and reset itself multiple times. Director Chen gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show what appeared to be the history of the confederation, but with ghostly overlays of alternative versions, paths not taken, decisions that led to different outcomes. Each civilization that discovered one of our beacons did so because their reality branch was approaching a collapse point. The beacons activate when catastrophic temporal instability is detected, allowing us to extract and relocate sentient species before their entire timeline is erased. Zilgsop's primary mind struggled with the implications while his secondary cognitive cluster processed the data with cold logic. You're saying the Zeth, the Quantum Hive, the Trixilians, they're all alive? Relocated to where exactly? To stable timeline branches, Director Chen explained, where they can continue their existence without the threat of temporal erasure. We call it the Continuity Protocol. Dr. Reeks's compound eyes reflected the holographic display as she studied it intently. Our entire understanding of physics is wrong. Not wrong, corrected Dr. Petrov, just incomplete, like trying to understand three-dimensional space when you can only perceive two dimensions. Counselor Vrex Darmar's containment suit hissed as he processed this information. Why the secrecy? Why not simply contact the Confederation directly? Commander Thompson exchanged glances with Director Chen before answering. Historical data shows that premature exposure to temporal mechanics leads to societal instability in 94% of cases. Civilizations that discover the malleable nature of time tend to try manipulating their own pasts, creating paradoxes that accelerate timeline collapse. So instead, Zilksop concluded, mandibles clicking in a pattern indicating comprehension mixed with indignation, you let us believe these civilizations were being destroyed, causing galactic panic, rather than simply explaining the situation. Better panic than paradox, Director Chen replied with a shrug. But now that you've activated a beacon and we've extracted you, we have a more immediate concern. The holographic display shifted again, showing the Confederation timeline with an ominous red glow spreading through it. Your timeline branch is approaching critical instability. Within approximately 30 standard cycles, it will collapse completely. 30 cycles? Kryzek growled. The Confederation contains over 12 trillion sentient beings across 8,000 worlds. Which is why we need your help, Commander Thompson said. As representatives of your respective species and the Confederation leadership, you're in a position to assist with the largest extraction operation we've ever attempted. Director Chen nodded. We can save everyone, but only with careful coordination to avoid creating further instabilities during the extraction process. And if we refuse to cooperate? Counselor Vrextamar asked, political suspicion overriding common sense, as usual. Dr. Petrov smiled thinly. Then you'll still be extracted because we're not monsters, but trillions will be erased from existence when your timeline collapses. Your choice. Zilgsop looked around at the human facility technology thousands of cycles beyond anything the Confederation had achieved, operated by a species thought long extinct, but apparently transcended to a state of existence the Confederation hadn't even conceived possible. All this time, he said finally, we thought humanity was a tragic footnote in galactic history, a species with potential that destroyed itself before achieving greatness. His mandibles clicked in what translated as ironic amusement. Instead, you've been saving us from our own ignorance of how reality actually works. Director Chen's expression softened. If it helps, Dr. Tao, your research came remarkably close to the truth. Your theories about quantum entanglement between the artifacts were particularly insightful. Not insightful enough, apparently, Zilksop replied dryly. Commander Thompson stepped forward. We need to begin preparations immediately. Your research vessel will be returned to Confederation space, modified with temporal stabilizers that will allow it to navigate the extraction process. You're sending us back? Dr. Rex asked, antennae twitching in surprise. With knowledge and technology to save your civilization, Director Chen confirmed. The continuity protocol has been initiated. Timeline Alpha 7 Delta will be preserved through integration with stable branch Omega 12. Hours later, as they prepared to return to their ship, now upgraded with technology that would have been indistinguishable from magic to Confederation science, Zilksop found himself alone with Director Chen. "There's something you're not telling us," the xenoarchaeologist observed. "Something about why these timeline collapses are occurring in the first place." Director Chen regarded him with an expression Zilksop couldn't quite interpret. Perceptive. "Yes, there is a larger context, but it involves concepts your species hasn't developed terminology for yet." A pause. "Let's just say that reality itself has immune responses to certain types of paradoxes. Your timeline has accumulated too many. Caused by what? By attempted communication across timelines, by civilizations discovering artifacts from other realities and trying to reverse engineer them. The Zeth began their collapse by analyzing a human communication device and creating their own version, which sent signals that shouldn't have been possible, creating fractures in their timeline." Zilksop's secondary eyes blinked in realization. So all these disappearances were actually caused by contact with human technology. Director Chen smiled faintly. "In a sense, though I prefer to think of it as humanity cleaning up the messes caused by the unintended consequences of our advancement. We've learned to stabilize our own timeline branches. We're helping other species do the same." As Zilksop and his team prepared to depart, Commander Thompson handed him what appeared to be a small device, similar to the Walkman they had discovered. "A temporal communicator," she explained. "It will allow us to coordinate the extraction efforts." Zilksop studied the device. "It looks remarkably like the entertainment device we found." "Form follows function across timelines," Thompson replied with a smile. "Besides, there's a certain poetry to it, don't you think? The same technology that alerted us to the danger will now help coordinate the rescue." As the research vessel Improbable Causality re-entered Confederation space, now equipped with technology beyond anything their civilization had dreamed possible, Zilks found himself contemplating the irony of their situation, while staring out at the familiar stars that would soon, in some sense, cease to exist. The Confederation had spent cycles fearing that discovering the truth behind the human artifacts would lead to their civilization's disappearance, and they had been absolutely correct, just not in the way anyone had imagined. Their civilization was indeed about to disappear, not into oblivion, but into a new understanding of reality, guided by a species they had dismissed as extinct, but who had actually transcended the very concept of linear existence. The journey back had given the team plenty of time to process the cosmic joke they'd stumbled into. Dr. Rex had spent most of it in the science lab, attempting to reconcile Confederation physics with what the humans had revealed. A futile but apparently entertaining exercise, judging by her occasional bursts of insectoid laughter that echoed through the ship's corridors. Security Chief Kryzik had taken a more practical approach, studying the temporal stabilizers the humans had installed. "If we're going to save trillions," she'd explained, her predatory focus shifting from combat to preservation, "I need to understand how these work well enough to train a security force." Councillor Vrex Tomar had spent the journey drafting policy documents for post-temporal integration governance, already jockeying for position in whatever new reality awaited them. Politicians, Zilksop reflected, were remarkably adaptable creatures. Give them an apocalypse, and they'd form a committee to standardize the end times. As they approached Confederation Central, the orbital megastructure that housed the council chambers and administrative centers for 8,000 member worlds, Zilksop activated the communications array, now enhanced with temporal stability protocols that the ship's AI had described as adorably primitive but functional. "Confederation Control, this is research vessel Improbable Causality requesting emergency docking clearance and immediate council assembly. Authentication code Epsilon 97 collapse." The brief silence that followed was broken by a confused controller. "Authentication confirmed, Dr. Tao, but your ship is showing anomalous energy signatures our systems can't classify, and you've only been gone for 3 days. Your mission parameters indicated a minimum 2-cycle investigation period." "Time," Zilksop replied dryly, "is more relative than we previously understood. Prepare the council. What I'm about to tell them will either cause the greatest panic or the greatest relief in Confederation history, possibly both simultaneously. 6 hours later, standing before the assembled High Council, representatives from all major member species crammed into the Grand Chamber with enough anxious energy to power a small star, Zilksop delivered what had to be the most ridiculous report in the history of xenoarchaeology. In conclusion, he finished, after explaining humanity's temporal transcendence, the impending timeline collapse, and the extraction plan, we have approximately 29 cycles to coordinate the relocation of the entire Confederation population to stable timeline branches. The silence that followed was so complete that Zilksop could hear the faint hum of the quantum translators processing his words into the myriad languages of the assembled delegates. High Councillor Blurplex's 17 appendages twitched in what could have been either seizure or deep contemplation. Finally, the gelatinous mass spoke. "Let me ensure I understand correctly, Doctor," the vocoder translated with remarkable calm. "Humanity, whom we believed extinct, actually evolved beyond linear time. They've been monitoring reality branches and extracting civilizations from unstable timelines before collapse. All 7 disappeared civilizations are alive and well in stable timelines. And now our timeline is collapsing, requiring us to coordinate with these temporal humans to evacuate our entire civilization." "That is correct, High Counselor, and we should trust them because—" Dr. Rex stepped forward, compound eyes flashing with scientific certainty. "Because my analysis confirms their claims. The temporal physics models they provided explain anomalies our science has observed but never understood. The mathematics is irrefutable." "Perhaps more convincingly," added Security Chief Krychek, "they could have simply allowed our timeline to collapse without warning us. There's no strategic advantage to an elaborate deception when ignoring us would achieve the same result with less effort." Councillor Vrex Tormar, never one to miss an opportunity for political posturing, floated forward in his containment suit. "I have taken the liberty of drafting initial protocols for coordinating with our human benefactors. While the situation is unprecedented, I believe our Confederation can rise to this temporal challenge with appropriate leadership." The chamber erupted in overlapping vocalizations, clicks, light pulses, pheromone releases, and various other species-specific expressions of agitation. Some delegates were already forming factional alliances, others were demanding more evidence, and at least 3 species were experiencing religious epiphanies regarding prophecies about the end of days that suddenly seemed less metaphorical. Zilksop watched the chaos with detached amusement. The temporal communicator in his pocket vibrated gently. A message from Commander Thompson. Typical first reaction, proceeding to Phase 2. As if on cue, every communication device in the chamber activated simultaneously. Screens, holographic projectors, neural interfaces, and auditory transmitters all conveyed the same message. A calm human voice speaking in each recipient's native language. "Greetings, citizens of the Galactic Confederation. I am Director Xavier Chen of the Temporal Conservation Initiative. We understand this news is shocking. To provide reassurance, we have established contact with representatives of the civilizations previously extracted from your timeline branch." The central holographic display activated, showing leaders from all 7 disappeared civilizations, the Zeth Hegemony, the Quantum Hive, the Crystalline Technocracy, and others, all very much alive and apparently thriving in environments that looked both familiar and subtly enhanced. "Your researchers have discovered the truth," announced the Zeth Imperator, whose distinctive carapace markings were recognized by several Elder Council members. "We have been relocated to stable timelines where our civilizations continue to flourish. The humans speak truth." What followed was a 3-hour information session that Zilksop suspected would become known as the Great Revelation in whatever historical records survived the transition. Representatives from previously vanished civilizations shared their experiences of extraction and relocation. Human temporal scientists answered technical questions with surprising patience, and gradually the initial panic transformed into cautious acceptance. As the session concluded, High Councillor Blurplex approached Zilksop privately, gelatinous form undulating with what the xenoarchaeologist recognized as suppressed amusement. "You know, Doctor," Blurplex gurgled quietly, "when I approved your expedition, I expected you to return with theories, perhaps some artifact fragments. Instead, you've brought us the end of our universe, and simultaneously its salvation. The universe, Zilkshop replied, mandibles clicking in appreciation of cosmic irony. Has a twisted sense of humor, indeed. And this timeline collapse, it's truly inevitable? According to the humans, yes. Too many paradoxes, too many cross-timeline contaminations. Reality has immune responses, apparently. Lurplex rippled thoughtfully. 12,000 cycles of Confederation history, 8,000 member worlds, countless achievements, all to be erased as if they never existed. Not erased, Zilksop corrected. Transplanted. Like moving a garden before a flood. Philosophical distinctions aside, Doctor, I find myself wondering if there's something poetic about it all. We've spent our existence fearing the unknown, categorizing threats, building defenses, only to discover that extinction was never the true ending. Zilksop clicked his mandibles in what his species recognized as appreciation for cosmic irony. The universe, it seems, occasionally has punchlines worth waiting for. As the council dispersed to begin preparations for the greatest evacuation in history, Zilksop stood alone at the viewport, gazing out at the spiral arm of the galaxy, a galaxy that, according to humanity, was just one version of countless possible iterations. The investigation was over, the mystery was solved, and in approximately 29 cycles, the Galactic Confederation of aligned species would indeed disappear completely, only to continue existing elsewhere beyond the boundaries of their current understanding, guided by a species they had relegated to extinction. Footnote: if that wasn't the punchline to the greatest cosmic joke ever told, Zilksop didn't know what was.